Hello everyone, I'm Adele Lewis, Community Manager at eSynergy. For those who are new that are joining us today, eSynergy are a technology consultancy and we build products, platforms and services that accelerate digital business outcomes for our customers. And today we are delighted to welcome you to Beequal, which is balanced, empowered and equal. And it's our dedicated community and event series focused on sharing stories and thought leadership around diversity, inclusion and belonging. eSynergy have a long-standing commitment to advancing D&I across both our internal organisation and the associates and client communities that we serve. And so Beequal really is a place for us to come together and highlight some of the challenges, successes and real-world examples of those that are striving to make a better workplace and opportunity for everyone. And I'm delighted to be joined by Sarah Wells, Technical Director, who's been working at the Financial Times for over a decade. And in a moment, Sarah's going to cover the things that they did during her time at the FT, not only to hire but also to retain members across the engineering team. Before I sort of hand over, just a bit of housekeeping. So if you've got any questions for Sarah, please do send this across in the chat box. We are going to be recording the session and this will be made available after by email. And Sarah, I believe you're also going to be sharing the slides after, so
yes.
We can make sure we follow that up. But without further ado, Sarah, over to you.
Great. So I want to start with this picture here because I think it looks like a staged picture. Happy developers, lots of women, but it isn't a staged picture at all. It is an actual incident workshop that our website developers had in 2019. We were running through an old incident to learn how to debug it and make people feel more confident about going on out of hours rota. And when I joined the FT, which was 11 years ago, rooms didn't look like this. There was very rarely a room that I was in where there were any other women. There were 4 or 5 women in the engineering team. There was no one more senior than me. I was a senior engineer. There was no one more senior than me who was technical, who was a woman. It was a very male environment. And it's completely changed over the time that I've been there. So I left the Financial Times just before Christmas. By that point, we were around 35% women and non-binary for our permanent engineers in London, which is quite a big change. And it was pretty even at all levels. So lots of women at principal engineer level. At tech director level, the majority of our technical directors were women. So the other thing about this picture to say is it's very white. And I think that actually doesn't represent the FT, which is very diverse in a lot of ways. But it does represent where a lot of diversity efforts start. And I think we need to be conscious that it's not enough to give more opportunities to women. And pretty much everything I say today applies for a lot of aspects of diversity and for underrepresented groups of all sorts. So why do you want to aim for a diverse team? So I think the first thing is that it's because the lack of diversity in teams is a result of us not giving people an equal chance. And there are quite a lot of research studies that show that there is bias in hiring practices. So this is one, it was run by the Centre for Social Investigation in 2019. And what they did was they sent out CVs with only a difference in the ethnic background of names that they sent out. And what they found was that some people are much more likely to get invited for an interview than others. And this is particularly the case for high skilled occupations. So if you send out a CV with a Nigerian name on it for highly skilled occupations, you will have to send out 120% more applications to get an interview with the same skills and experience. And highly skilled occupations here includes software development. So this is our industry that this is happening in. And it is interesting because people always say, oh, when you talk about hiring more diverse staff, you should get the best candidates regardless of background. I love this Twitter thread. John Byrne Murdoch is a data journalist at the FT, and he posted this recently, basically saying, this is actually not the argument that they think it is. This is basically the case that as soon as you widen the net, you're going to see better candidates. So if you recruit the top candidates from the demographic you've always recruited from, and now you also see the best candidates from other demographics, you're going to get a better team. And this feeds into the second reason to aim for a diverse team, which is that diverse teams do better. And this is an article from the Harvard Business Review. This links to a report from McKinsey where they found that as you have more diversity, you're more likely to do better than the median financial performance. So the top line there is not showing that if you have more ethnic diversity, you have 35% better outcomes, but you are 35% more likely to have a better than average outcome. And in that article, there is a lot of other research cited that says that diverse teams focus more on facts, they process those facts more carefully, and they're more innovative. And I think that is partly because you just have more smart people because you're hiring the best from every demographic, but also you have more variety of backgrounds and experience. And my example, I think, whenever I'm thinking about where homogenous teams have a blind spot is the Apple Health app that got, this is all about quantified self and measuring things, but they managed to launch it in the first place with nothing about menstrual cycles, which just seems incredible to me. This is an article from a former colleague of mine, Reese, and he is basically saying that, as a white male, also a diverse team is something that has an impact on him. And in particular, he said it was the first time where he felt like he could be himself. He didn't have to fit into a template of interests. He could be interested in what he was interested, because there was such a diversity of all of those things. So I think it's good for everybody. I want to talk about hiring and retaining. I'm going to start with hiring. And the thing about hiring is this is the way that you start to increase your diversity in your organization. And there are two aspects. Do you manage to attract a diverse range of candidates? And then do you run an interview process that treats them fairly? So if you want to attract a range of candidates, you should showcase an inclusive culture. For senior roles particularly, you're competing with a lot of other companies for small numbers of people from underrepresented groups. So it's important that you stand out in all the right ways. So, it's a risk to join a new company if it's something where you're going to go there and find that you don't thrive. You want to find a place where you are going to thrive. So I would look and see whether you have people from underrepresented groups in leadership positions. Do they talk about the company? Do other leaders talk about diversity and inclusion? And I want to see concrete actions that your organization is doing. And you can do this regardless of whether your current organization has a lot of underrepresented groups. You can start talking about parental leave and about support for mental health and all these things that show that you are a place where people can thrive. And the Financial Times has a public About Us page that talks about diversity and inclusion. It has a vision statement. It also has very concrete things, because the annual report from 2020 mentions diversity and inclusion. The FT has been reporting gender pay gaps ever since they were obliged to. Every company over a certain size has to report on that, but they also publish voluntarily an ethnicity pay gap. So there's concrete actions there that are showing how they're doing. And then there is a link that shows all of the FT's employee networks. And I'll talk a bit about them later. This is the FT's product and tech blog. And I used to run this, and we made a real effort to make sure that we had a range of voices. So people from different roles, seniorities, gender, all kinds of other things, and different topics. Candidates read your blog, they notice it, so that's important. And we have a Life at FT Twitter account which posts jobs and also cultural stuff, and that's a powerful combination. The second thing is about using your networks. Encourage people to reach out to their networks when you're hiring, but be aware that people's networks look a lot like them. So this works for you once you have diversity in your workplace. Before that, you have to be very specific about saying, please reach out to your network and say we're interested in applications from underrepresented groups. Ask people to share job postings. This is where something like a Twitter account or LinkedIn post makes it very easy for someone to amplify a message. And if you've got people going out to conferences or speaking at conferences, make sure they talk about specific roles. Almost every talk has a "we're hiring" slide, but if you want to really have an impact, you say, I am hiring for this particular role, and this is what you would be doing if you get it. And that works. I have a colleague who did that at a conference, got approached afterwards, did the first interview at the conference, and that person joined the FT. So this can really work. Bad job specs filter out good people. You'll find a lot of articles online that talk about the wording to use or avoid. There are tools that you can run specs through to see whether the language is gendered, but beware, because they're not always, they're a bit of blunt tools sometimes. So I had one case where a job spec was coded as female. And when I dug into it, it appeared to be because it featured a mention of Nagios, which is a monitoring solution, which I can only assume is because they saw Nag as being female coded, which is also not good. But run your spec past people. Ask if there's anything in it that would spook them. So, for example, I'm really put off by talk of rock stars or crushing it. If you mention free beer pong, I kind of feel you're a 20-year-old man. If there's a long list of mandatory technologies, that often puts off people who would totally be able to do the job. You should be very careful before you have a high barrier. This is an old article that I've linked here, written by the FT Labs team. They noticed that they were getting no women applying for a particular job, so they went and showed the job spec to people, and they changed quite a lot of elements of it. It's moved away from talking about being, dedicated and more to talk about collaboration, and they changed their examples about flexible working. So flexible working is brilliant. Their example said you can leave early to play football. Now it says you can come in late after the school run and leave early to play sport. And it's just those small tweaks, and it made a difference for their applicants. Once the interview process starts, you need to be thinking about whether you look like a good place for this person to work. And you try really hard not to have an all-white interview panel, an all-male interview panel. It sends a message. But there is a kind of flip side here, which is if you don't have much diversity in your organization, you can put a big burden on the few people who are underrepresented. You need to be really careful that you're asking them to do interviews all the time, and they lose out on other opportunities to do work that's more promotable. I still remember at the FT, I was often asked in the early days to sit in on interviews. And the first time someone asked me because of the fact I was a Java expert rather than because I was a woman, it was really nice. It was great to feel that. You should track diversity stats at every stage to see whether you are getting a drop off from candidates from underrepresented groups, because it could be there's something there that you need to look closely at. And that's exactly what our customer products group did, looking specifically at recruiting people of colour. And I'm really happy someone felt they could raise that they thought this was a problem and that someone responded to it. You do need to ask people whether they will share information about their background, and you have to say that's optional. So you have to explain why you're doing it. It's often really good to try and do a lot of these things very openly. You shouldn't select based on how much free time someone has. So there's often a phase in interviews where people say, oh, I sent them with a take-home test and it's only going to take 3 hours of their time. But if you give that to them one day and expect them to return it 2 days later, you're expecting them to have free time. Not everyone can drop everything and use their time to do a coding test. And often women, particularly people in middle age, they've got caring responsibilities. They have children, they have elderly parents. People also may not have a place to do this kind of thing at home. They may not have a quiet place. They may not have a desk. So you should be clear about the process, the timescales. You should make sure there's a bit of slack, but also don't ask for huge amounts of people's time. You should support non-standard routes into coding. I think this normally applies for more entry-level roles, because I really hope that you're not looking for a degree for people who've got many years of experience. But when you're hiring at entry level, don't just look for graduates, because there are relatively fewer women doing 3-year computing courses than there are master's courses, and people maybe not willing to get into debt for a degree. They might do a boot camp because that's less of a financial commitment. And postgraduate courses and boot camps can be more diverse. The FT's had a lot of success with hiring through organizations like Makers Academy and Code Your Future. And generally those people have stayed at the FT for a while, and we have at least one principal engineer who came in through those routes. So it's a good way to increase your diversity, is to hire in at more junior levels and be the sort of place people want to stay and progress. Now a bit about retaining. I think there is a lot of talk about hiring for diversity and inclusion and less on retention. So people talk about the pipeline. We need to encourage more people from underrepresented groups into computing, but we also need to retain them by making this a place where people thrive and want to stay. And this is from the US-based National Center for Women and Information Technology, and it shows that women leave computing and other STEM jobs at a much higher rate than men, and at a much higher rate than they leave other STEM jobs. So non-STEM jobs. So we're basically seeing that women are quitting. So that suggests that this is not an industry that's as friendly as other places. We can do more. So what can you do? Well, you could talk about what you do to support diversity and inclusion. And these have to be concrete things. It can't just be, it's nice to say this matters to us, but you have to show that it matters to you too. It's by default, I would like everything to be as public as possible, but there will be things you can only share internally. You have to make it specific, because otherwise, if you just send out a tweet on International Women's Day, people see through that. And this year there was a gender pay gap bot that replied to every tweet about International Women's Day with the gender pay gap that company had reported, which led to lots of hastily deleted tweets. You need to expect white men, and in particular white men in leadership positions, to talk about how important diversity and inclusion is. You can't leave it only to people from underrepresented groups. And I actually really like that when I was looking for things to share for this talk, the blog posts were written by white male principal engineers at the FT. It again sends a message that this matters to the organization as a whole. You have to give opportunities to underrepresented people. People notice when there isn't an equal level of opportunity, and if you promote people based on looking and acting like those already in the role, you may end up with problems if that group that already are there are quite homogenous. When I was at the FT early on, I got told I didn't seem ready to step up to being a tech lead because I wasn't putting myself forward enough. But I'd been a tech lead for 15 years before I joined the FT, and not everyone shows they're ready for promotion by making a noise. Think about the kinds of opportunities that you do give, because if you ever find yourself saying to a woman, but you're so good with people, make sure you aren't asking her to do work that is not as promotable. And don't assume that women want to move into a management role and away from hands-on technical. It's something I've had to fight to stay technical. This is a slide from a fabulous talk from Tanya about glue work, which is the kind of work that needs to be done but often isn't valued. So the things that someone writes some documentation or arranges a meeting or just makes things happen, and then when they get to the point of promotion, they're told, well, you didn't deliver a big technical project. Honestly, openly valuing glue work will make your company a much better place, but just make sure you're not asking people to do it and then penalizing them for the fact that they do it. Data is really important. You need to be looking at data, so you need to collect it, and it can be tricky. When we first started talking about diversity and inclusion at the FT, we only had information about gender. We had to amend the HR system to be able to track other aspects of diversity, and that took a while. And it's really important when you do it to make sure the options you offer make sense to people. So you get advice on the language you use for collecting information about gender, sexuality, race. You need to explain to people why you're doing it, because they will be a bit dubious, potentially, they'll be suspicious, and you have to allow people to opt out. But once you have this data, you need to then use it. So once we have had information, every promotion round, we would look at the list of people and we'd see, are we disproportionately favoring some groups? Are we putting more men up for promotion than we are women? By far. We also established pay bands for every role, which meant we could be much more consistent in our offers. And we looked at the people who were outliers, the people who were below those bands, to fix. And those outliers were rarely white men. So it showed that our offers in the past had been not equal, and we've spent a lot of time making those things equal. You measure what matters to you as an organization. So if you don't have any metrics that are around diversity and inclusion, then you're saying we're not measuring and we don't doesn't matter to us in the same way. So Kate O'Riordan was the CPIO at the FT for 5 years, and she left in the middle of last year. And she set a goal some years ago that's pretty ambitious and very clear and public. So gender parity in the product and technology department by 2023. And we had OKRs, so key results and objectives, every quarter that related to that. So it might be something like 50% of the people we hire this quarter will be women, trans, or non-binary. This can cause people to worry that you're going to just lower the bar and hire someone regardless. OKRs are meant to be stretchy. What this did was made sure everyone had to pay attention to whether they were looking at a range of candidates. Offer training. Expect your leaders to attend. So if you've got training or workshops or events around diversity, you have to make sure that your leadership team are there. Leaders have packed calendars. It's very easy for them to not prioritize it, but it sends, again, the wrong message. And we had this raised by more junior staff at the FT. So it does get noticed. Stand up for your people. So Lara Hogan has this great article where she talks about what sponsorship looks like. And women are often over-mentored and under-sponsored. So mentoring is about sharing knowledge and offering guidance. It's someone who's got experience of what you're doing who can help give you advice. Sponsors are in the room where decisions get made. They give people opportunities. And that can have an immediate impact on your career. If you're in a position to be a mentor, you should do it. But if you're in a leadership position, think about who you sponsor and the kind of opportunities that you give. You can also stand up for people in other ways. I can still remember 2 colleagues stepping in during a meeting where I got spoken over several times by the same person. They just said, let's hear from Sarah. And I really appreciated that. Set up employee networks. So I used to be very, very wary of employee networks, things like women in tech groups. And I realized that it's because I didn't feel they had the power to actively change things. If you do it right, it's transformational. And that means you have to do proper investment of both time and money. So you should sponsor these groups at the highest level. They should have a board level sponsor. You should recognize that it takes time to run them. So people shouldn't have to do them alongside their job. You should give them time to do it. If they're running events in the evening, give them time off in lieu. You're asking people probably to take on glue work. Make sure they don't lose out as a result of that. Give them a budget. Make sure they are consulted where there's something that may have an impact. So the LGBTQ plus group at the FT was consulted on a new trans inclusion policy. So I'll share the slides for this, but we have, I think, 7 networks, or had 7 networks at the FT, but when I left. They cover a large range of things. And I think they have changed the culture significantly. People feel more willing to talk about themselves and to share aspects of themselves. My experience as a result of this, it's all been very positive. Also, they've been led to some extent, in some cases, by staff who've said we should have a group for this. So we have these, we have other ones relating to women, mental health, families. We have one for sustainability, and that came directly out of people saying we should care about this stuff. The final thing I want to say is that you need to be prepared for difficult conversations if you're trying to increase diversity and inclusion. Be prepared for friction, because when you're striving to make things more equal, a white man might feel that his opportunities have shrunk. I've had white men who work for me say, well, I'll never get promoted. It isn't true, and you need to explain why it's a positive change. So you need to talk about how this is really not lowering the bar. It's about ensuring equality of opportunity. There will be a more diverse group of candidates being interviewed. You can be one of them. And if you are the best person, you will get the job. The key thing here is to fill the pipeline and look at your biases. You don't want to be trying to promote someone who's not ready. You want to be just making sure there's equality of opportunity. So a lot of what I've said, I wrote in response to a question from Gergely Orosh, who wrote a newsletter, The Pragmatic Engineer, where there are also 5 other people who shared with him what they'd learnt about building diverse teams. There's a lot of great advice in that post if you want to learn more. And then also, if this makes you curious about the Financial Times, this is their career site. I left because I'd been there a long time and it was time for me to move on. It is still a great place to work, and it is still very good if you care about a diverse and inclusive culture. And now I think that's it. And if anyone has any questions, I am happy to answer them.
Well, I think I'll definitely kick off, Sarah, if that's okay. I had a question. I guess everything that you shared, obviously there was so many different initiatives and things that you had to consider on that journey of attracting and retaining talent. Was there anything that stood out to you out of everything that really changed the dial, in your opinion? Was there anything that you did that you felt, if an organization was going to focus on one thing at a time, and maybe that first step, what does that look like? What do you think that would be? Oh, you're on mute, sorry.
Sorry, I think thinking about the way that you do interviewing has quite an immediate impact, but actually I actually think one of the key things is to try and look at hiring people from underrepresented groups into senior roles. Because as soon as you have hiring or promoting, because as soon as you have someone there, people see it as a path. So, if I've never ever had a woman more senior than me who was technical in my career, but I know that there are people at the FT who can see that women become tech directors. So there are women at the FT who can see that path, and I think that has a real impact that you may not realize until you see it. So actually use your network and specifically look hard at how can I find someone. We really targeted key people, key hires into the tech director group at the FT, and we would do a lot of chatting to people before the interview process even started. So it's work, and you need to really work at it.
Thanks, Sarah.
Do you want me to? I can see they've got a few questions in. Shall I just
take it away?
Okay. How did FT help people feel like they belong? Well, I do think it's partly making sure that you consistently talk all the time about what matters to you. The employee groups did have an impact. I feel like they made people feel more comfortable to talk about themselves. So I saw more people talking about neurodiversity after we had a group that was talking about that and supporting it. So I think that feeling that you have a community and there are other people who come from the same background and that it's normal to talk about it if you want to really, really worked. So I don't know if Harriet, if that answers that. And also, Kate O'Riordan consistently spoke about how this mattered to her. When she left, a huge amount of the tributes to her were about how the department had become far more inclusive during the time. Second question, how did I assess my new employer? So I have not moved to a new place. I'm actually writing a book about microservices at the moment, so I've not started a new role, but it will be very important to me, actually. When I joined the FT, it wasn't a massive factor to think about diversity and inclusion because I'd never really found any organizations that had a lot of people that from an underrepresented group. Now it would be really important because I've seen what it's like. I really like being in a discussion where I don't feel I'm representing all women. So I think that when I'm moving on, I'll be looking for all the things I mentioned in that section about hiring. Like, do you showcase that you are going to be the kind of place that I would like to work? And I think there is also a network. People hear about bad places as well, so just make sure that you're not on that list. Next question I can see, what's the best course of action if senior leadership are the ones who want diverse teams while those lower down the chain are more reluctant? I think this is probably, it depends. If this is about, well, I feel like my opportunities are going to be closed down, I think that's the message you have to be like reiterating is we're not positively discriminating. We're giving people equal opportunity. If you are good, you will still have opportunities. Your teams will be nicer, but you should also, any change, any change that you have, there's a whole discipline of change management. Any change that you will have people who will be keen, people who will follow in the middle, and people who will not like it. And so you should expect that you will lose some people for any change. And I think if you've got a group that are not universally happy, you should kind of expect some of them will go and find somewhere else, and that would be okay. But what you want to do is hire good people and demonstrate that this is an improvement to your team. What was the most enjoyable part of your diversity inclusion journey at the FT for me personally? I just enjoyed it the first time I was in a room where there was another. So I was the first woman principal engineer at the FT and the first woman tech director, and the first meeting where there was another woman in the room, and Anna Shipman. I love Anna. She and I have lots of things in common, but we also have lots of things that are different. So suddenly it doesn't feel like this is what a woman in engineering looks like, and that was just really that was really great. But it's been, I'm talking a lot about it from now in terms of gender because it's what is most apparent to me, but it's also starting to see a more diverse group across lots of different aspects, and to feel like people can be themselves at work was really nice. People were more willing to talk about their lives, I think, as a result of becoming a more inclusive organisation.
Great. Well, I think that is all for questions at this time. So thank you so much again, Sarah, for sharing your journey with us. And a big thanks to everyone that's tuned in to join us live today. As mentioned, we will be in touch to share the slides and the recording if you want to rewatch anything from what we've discussed today. And Sarah, I guess the best point of contact for you would be through your Twitter, which I think you popped up, but we'll also make sure that's included in our follow-up message. So yeah, thank you everyone for tuning in, and a big thanks again, Sarah. Really appreciate your time today and for all the questions. Thanks, everyone.
Yes, thanks everybody. Thanks.